Hello students, I am Dr. Shamustri Maji, an assistant professor in the Department of English at Durgapur Women's College. I welcome you to the third part of my lecture on T.S. Eliot's poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The poem begins with an evening scene when Prufrock is on his way to a club or to a friend's house in order to socialize. He also wishes to propose love to the woman he likes. In this lecture, my dear students, we will try to understand the significance of the title. We will also try to understand the themes, that is, the major ideas that are presented in this poem. Dear students, please notice the title. The phrase "the love song" was taken from the title of Rudyard Kipling's poem The Love Song of Har Dayal. Unlike the name Har Dayal, the name J. Alfred Prufrock suggests concealment of identity. The abbreviation J connotes partial representation of the person. If you read the poem, then you will understand that there is a discrepancy between the romantic note expressed in the phrase "the love song" and the mood of despair represented in the persona of Prufrock, who is the representative of a common man in the modern urban society. My dear students, this is evident in the use of the pronoun we towards the end of the poem. Although the poem begins with the pronouns you and I, let us go then you and I hope you remember the first line of the poem. But towards the end, we see that Eliot uses the pronoun we. Let us read those lines. Quote, "We have lingered in the chambers of the sea by sea-girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown." Unquote. Eliot presents a crisscross of different voices in this poem. The sea-girls represent the world of fantasy, whereas the women whom Prufrock plans to meet in the evening belong to the world of reality. They represent the upper class society who have knowledge about art and culture. Please refer to this line. Quote, "In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo." Unquote. I will come to this line after some time, but you should mark this line in your textbook. The references to these women do not evoke pleasure in the mind of Prufrock. Instead, we observe that he is nervous. He is in a dilemma whether or not to communicate his love proposal to the woman he admires. Also, it is not clearly stated to whom he wants to propose love, because he uses the plural form of noun and pronoun while referring to the opposite sex. So, my dear students, in my previous lectures, I've already said that identity crisis is an important theme of modernist literature. And this identity crisis, or lack of identity, or rather intentionally keeping the identity hazy or blurred, this we can clearly observe in the poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Let us come back to our point of discussion. We were talking about Prufrock's attitude towards women. And now I will ask you to refer to these lines. Quote, "For I have known them all already, known them all. Arms that lie along the table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? And how should I begin? Unquote. These are the lines that Prufrock says while referring to or while expressing his thoughts on the women whom he wants to meet or whom he plans to meet in that evening party. So what do we observe in these lines? These metonymic images. I hope you remember what is metonymy. I hope you remember the figure of speech metonymy. It refers to something which is represented through part for the whole, which is represented through the idea of part for the whole. So now let us look into those lines once again. For I have known them all already, known them all. Arms that lie along the table. So he is not referring to the whole body or the whole persona of the woman or the women. He is referring to the parts, arms. Arms that lie along the table or wrap about a shawl. This is what I want to refer to as metonymic image. Arms is referring to the part of the body, but this part of the body, arm, it represents the whole person. These metonymic images, quite cinematic in its representation. These metonymic images suggested the superficiality, the artificialities of the women. Their discussion on art and culture is as trivial as their coming into the room and then again going away from there. Although they have external beauty, they are hollow from within. They don't have depth of knowledge. Perhaps they are so self-centered that they cannot understand the agony of the poor people or the people who suffer from anxieties or who suffer from neurosis like Prufrock. On the one hand, these lines tell us about the shallowness of the so-called cultured women of the upper class. On the other hand, these also convey Prufrock's lack of confidence. He suffers from indecisiveness. He fumbles while using language for social interaction. He knows the ladies who talk about Michelangelo, the great Italian painter of the Renaissance period. You must be knowing that. He is familiar with the attitudes and the behavior of these women, but he cannot muster courage to speak up in front of them. Yes, I'm talking about Prufrock. Prufrock is familiar with the attitudes and the behavior of these women, but he cannot muster courage to speak up in front of them. There is no mention of any conversation between Prufrock and these women in the poem. Although he walks into the world of fantasy to escape the shallowness of the people living in the world of reality, we do not notice any change in his mood or personality. Although he speaks of the mermaids, who are imaginary creatures, he is not sure whether the mermaids will reciprocate to his amorous feelings or not. He is uncertain about their response. Thus, he says, once again I will quote from the text, quote, "I have heard the mermaids singing each to each, I do not think that they will sing to me, unquote. So, my dear students, I hope you can observe. By now, you have observed that we cannot trace either romantic love or a melodious song in this poem. It presents an introspective discourse in which you can hardly find out any physical activity on the narrator's part. The narrative of Prufrock is described as an interior monologue because it represents the thoughts and the anxieties of Prufrock in fragmented images. I know that the term interior monologue reminds you of Robert Browning's experimentation with dramatic monologue. While dramatic monologue refers to the presence of two people, the speaker and an implied listener, interior monologue represents an individual with fragmented personality. Eliot was particularly indebted to the 19th century French poet Jules Laforgue in his use of monologue. So, in interior monologue, as we observe it in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the line between the speaker and the listener is blurred, B-L-U-R-R-E-D, blurred. That means hazy. Although it begins with, quote, "Let us go then, you and I," unquote, the representation of Prufrock's perplexities and neurosis in the poem tell us that the you and the I are not separate individuals. The split self, it tells us about the split self. The self of Prufrock is split into a subject and an object. His self-consciousness provokes him to analyze the ways in which he is being looked at by other people. Such representation of the self is termed as dédoublement. A French word, my dear student, dédoublement, a French word, the English spelling of which is like dedoublement with an accent mark on the first E. It highlights the mental suffering of a modern man in a city. Thus, we observe that Prufrock is disillusioned of the romantic perspectives and he scrutinizes his social representation with auto-irony, which is a characteristic of interior monologue. His inertia results from his assumption that he is an object of ridicule in the eyes of the upper-class women. It draws our attention to his inability to communicate with his social surrounding. Everything seems to be monotonous and static, except time. This inability and inertia compels him to procrastinate, that is, to postpone his decision to ask the overwhelming question for which he has ventured out that evening. At this point, my dear students, in order to show that time is the most active element in this poem, I would like to read from the text. Quote, "There will be time to mutter and create, and time for all the works and the days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me and time yet for 100 indecisions. and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea, unquote. One thing is clear from the discussion we have done so far, that Prufrock's main problem is his inefficiency to communicate with others. At this point, we need to ask the following questions. Please note down these questions, dear students. Number 1. Why did Eliot highlight Prufrock's inability to communicate as one of the major ideas in this poem? Question number 2. Do you think that problem lies not with Prufrock's character but with the conventional language which is commonly used for communication? Question number 3. Can we relate the inefficiency of Prufrock and the inadequacy of language with the trends in modernist literature? My dear students, we will find the answers to these questions. We will find the answers to these questions in my next lecture. In the meantime, I will request you to think over these questions for a week till we are back for our next lecture. So thank you for listening to me, and meet you again in my next lecture, that is part 4, lecture part 4 on T.S. Eliot's poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Thank you.